Next session, Cellphone Nation, presented by Patrika Game Changer series. And of course, I'm reading this off my cell phone. Please welcome to the stage Ravi Agrawal, author of India Connected, How the Cell Phone is Transforming the World's Largest Democracy. Assa Doron and Jeffrey, co-authors of Cellphone Nation, in a session moderated by multi-award winning journalist Barkha Dutt. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. So is there anyone here without a cell phone? Any sort of rare being? That because you're not allowed one? You will get one? What age have your parents promised you one? 14 or 15. So I think if 15 years ago, if you'd asked the same question, you would have had a very different response. And I think the phone has almost become like an appendage. We don't even notice it. It's like a natural extension. And there are many subtle and not so subtle ways in which the mobile phone revolution, the cell phone revolution has changed culture, politics, the arrangement of power, how we communicate. It's broken down relationships, it's enhanced relationships, it's empowered women. And that's one of the reasons so many women are under pressure in India to not be allowed to have a phone. And there's so many different ways. It's completely revolutionized the grammar of how political campaigns are conducted, for example. So to talk about all of this and more, and also to hear your questions, two really, really wonderful books, which I really recommend you read. Cellphone Nation by Doron and Jeffrey and Assa Doron, and India Connected by Ravi Agrawal. So do pick up your copy, but let's get straight into it. I'll start with you, Ravi. What's the one biggest change? I mean, the numbers are staggering. This is a country, as all three of you have pointed out, with 300 million people are still illiterate. But an estimated 800 million people have access to a smartphone, right? So this is in itself offering an innovative alternative to the lack of education. Even if you can't read and write, you can talk to your phone. The phone can talk to you. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So, I mean, my sense is that the biggest change is that really this is for everyone. I mean, unlike, say, for example, 20, 30 years ago, a TV wasn't for everyone. Mm-hmm. A streaming device wasn't for everyone. Mm. Cameras weren't for everyone. And you now have this cheap device, which is all of these things in one. A computer. So in the year 2000, only 2% of Indians had PCs. Only 3% of Indians had telephone landlines.
I don't even know if this generation would know what a PC is.
I don't think they will. They will.
Is there anyone here who does not know what a PC is?
Personal computer.
Personal.
But the thing is, most Indians are never going to use a PC. They're never going to get one. And so just to have so many things packed into this one device, the smartphone, is truly exceptional. So I think we have to see it, and this is where India's story is unique and different from, say, America's or the UK's, in that, if it weren't for this device, people wouldn't have cameras. I mean, we were joking a few minutes ago about selfies. Mm-hmm. You know, for most Indians, this is the first sort of camera experience they've ever had. And for good reason. India has more deaths by selfie than any other country on earth. So that's what I'd kick it off with, in that, it's transformational because it brings so many different things to the table.
Robin, technology is revolutionary only if it can challenge the status quo. And status quo is defined by power. And I think the most disruptive thing possibly that the cell phone has done is that it has challenged and questioned and subverted, in some cases, the conventional arrangement of who is powerful and who is not. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, when Assa and I wrote Cellphone Nation, or when we were writing it, that's 5 or 6 years ago, we found that the closest thing for sheer disruption that human society had as a personal thing that every individual carries around with them, the cell phone, we argued, was the biggest thing since shoes. And
wow.
Shoes, pretty spectacular achievement. When people started putting things on their feet, they could walk to places they couldn't walk to before. And more important, if you think of the way shoes have an impact in either giving people status, think of Imelda Marcos, the former Philippines dictator's wife, who was supposed to have thousands of pairs of shoes, partly as a mark of status. if you want to deprive somebody of status, you take away their shoes. What's the first thing they do at security? They take your cell phone and examine what's on it. And if you think, too, in gender relations, when you talk about shoes, you say, what's the male chauvinist pig's most frequently heard, or the frequently heard cry of the male chauvinist pig? What is a woman's place? Barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. And that, of course, is similar with a cell phone. Don't give the girls a cell phone because it will make them unbearable. It will make them have ideas that they shouldn't have. Consequently, the cell phone has that kind of power to disrupt family relations. It also has the power to disrupt political relations. Asi and I were very interested in that at one stage and ran an argument that the 2007 UP elections, the Uttar Pradesh elections, were won on the basis of cell phone use by groups that hadn't had them before. And that's something Asi can probably talk to if you want to explore that.
Why don't you come in on that, Assa? Because, political parties today are aware that narratives are built on WhatsApp. And that's a double-edged sword because there is also a lot of fake news and disinformation that travels. Technology actually takes out gatekeepers. And that is the downside of it, right? There are no editorial gatekeepers. Everyone with a phone today is a broadcast journalist, is a photographer, is an opiner, is a columnist. So it's great that old entrenched hierarchies have been broken. But there is also a danger in how this is changing our politics. And I'm wondering whether you think that the mobile phone revolution has changed Indian politics for good, or are we at a very dangerous inflection point?
I think exactly like you mentioned, mobiles are an instrument. You can use it for the good and for the bad. And we know that WhatsApp has imposed limitations in India because of the problems that occurred, for example, with the lynching or with the child lifting and so on. And this is, India in a sense was the epicenter of this, and now WhatsApp is implementing these policies worldwide because of the dangers that, circulating all those WhatsApp images, very provocative images, to mobilize people and activists. But like Robin said, when we were working in 2007 in UP, what was remarkable to see is the BSP and all the people on the ground mobilizing each other throughout in places which are far away, in villages around UP, telling people to come and vote, telling people to mobilize their families. And that, I think, was a very crucial instrument for Baspa to win the election in 2007.
Ravi, what Jairam Ramesh once famously said is now cliche. India has more mobile phones than toilets. But I'm just wondering, when you were writing your book, how did you understand the psychology of a poor person who is struggling to put two meals on a table, on his or her table, but he or she will have a phone, right? So there is something in the prioritization. One is that I think data and phones are cheaper in India than anywhere else in the world. But there are many other things a family will deny to itself, but it will have a phone. I mean, I just went on a trip to Uttar Pradesh and I met really, farmers who are suffering from agrarian distress. And they were talking about how they're destroying their crops because no one's buying them. But each one of them had a mobile phone. And I would say, is there somewhere I can contact you? And each one of them had a mobile phone. And not just the old style little Nokia phones, but smartphones. And I would be like, yeah, okay, if you have a problem, you can WhatsApp me an image, you can And how do you understand that psychology? That you can't afford A, B, and C, but you will have a phone?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and again, I think it's important for all of us to think of this as, something that is not for us here, because all of us can afford phones, but if you imagine that there are so many Indians who are putting away, 3 or 4 months' salary or a month's salary at the very least to buy a phone, that's how big it is for them, and I think the way I began to see this is that. For many of them, there's the obvious stuff. It's a tool of efficiency. It has all of these different gadgets in it. But step back for a second, and it's more than that. It's in a sense a motif of hope. It's a motif of a dream, in a sense. Like if I had to say, what is the one thing that symbolizes the Indian dream? It would be the smartphone, much in the same way that a century ago, for Americans, the American dream was symbolized by the car. You know, so you invented the car, and then Americans built roads and highways and the interstate system. They built suburbia. They built a way of life. They built all this infrastructure along the way, from the gas stations and the multiplexes and the garages. And more than that, it was, you know, the first private property for most Americans. It was the thing that people saved up for, months and months of salary. It was something that became essential. And then in the American imagination, it became, you know, it was American freedom. It was the American dream. It was social mobility, literal mobility. And I think you take all of those things and transpose it to India, and that's what the smartphone is.
So you're saying the phone has become a symbol of egalitarianism in a deeply unequal country, in a way?
Absolutely.
If not a symbol, at least an aspiration.
It's an aspiration. And I think it's important to make that distinction, because this isn't a fix-all.
Oh, no.
But clearly enough people invest hope and dreams in it as a tool with which they can get other stuff.
Robin, you want to come in on that?
Yes, the great Spanish sociologist Manuel Castells really nailed it, I think. He said, it's not the mobility that the phone gives you, it's the autonomy. It's the fact that it makes you an individual in a way that you weren't an individual before. You can do things that are known only to you by using your mobile phone. And the 4G phone, of course, has so much more potential. 2G was a miracle, but 4G is what you have after a miracle, I think. And I see we're going to have 5G by June of this year. The ministry is going to release 5G frequency for auction. And I don't know what 5G will bring, but
I think what's interesting as well is to put a cautionary note there. I mean, when I was doing field work in Varanasi amongst the boatmen, and one boatman discovered that his brother was hanging, his body was hanging in his room, and he knew that this was a murder due to rival families on the riverfront, on the Ghats. But he also knew that the police would fob it off as suicide. So the first thing he did
Was to take a picture.
Was to take a picture so he can actually show this as evidence. But having said that, I met him then and we spoke about it, and he said, look, they didn't do anything. The other families bribed the police, and he had limited resources and influence on the police, and the images didn't elicit too much sympathy from the police, and he didn't have the clout to take it higher up the bureaucratic chain or the media. Now, that was the 2G era. Think about the 4G era now. If this might have been the case now, he could have put it in WhatsApp, on social media platform, and perhaps exert more power on the police or more influence for things to be done. So I think these things are changing. The mobile phones have both potential and limitations.
So, Ravi, talk a little bit about what this does to the privacy debate in India, right? You have the Supreme Court actually recognizing the right to privacy in this country, but the fact of the matter is that there is nothing that is private anymore if that space has anyone having a phone, holding a phone, right? It's almost like the Truman Show, like you're always being recorded, you're always an actor either in your own play or somebody else's play, right? That is what, the phone has changed us culturally. The phone has changed notions of intimacy, what's private, what's public. Is anything private anymore? Do we have any notion of this is my space and I won't let anyone into it, when we have become voyeurs and exhibitionists in a way because of this smartphone?
And there's such a great irony to the way you're describing privacy, because, you know, think back to when we first got phones. This was our first private screen.
Yes.
This was our first way of seeing something that no one else could see. It wasn't a TV, it wasn't a laptop, it wasn't a computer screen. It was private. And therein lies the danger in investing too much in this one device, because we thought that this was the most private thing we had. It was where we would have private conversations. It was where we could browse things and see things that no one else knows about. And lo and behold, little did we know that the era that we're entering now is an era of where, you know, our data is a commodity that could easily be sold to the highest bidder, that there are ways in which we are signing off our rights to our data and our contacts and our pictures and our things we're saying. It's really dangerous. And you know, it's one thing for us to talk about that here, Barkha, but you know, most Indians, I'm afraid,
don't
see it that way.
I don't know. I don't know that they
think there's
understand. I don't know that we understand it. I don't know that even after understanding, maybe we've just accepted that this is kind of a new cultural shift.
Well, I don't think most Indians even know what they're giving up. I don't think, this debate we're having about privacy and data is a fairly elite debate. I mean, I think most people still don't know what they're giving up. They don't know what they're signing away. They don't know that they're being listened to. They don't know that Google Analytics can listen to conversations that you're having and use it as data. They don't know that Facebook can access your contacts and use that to determine, who you met last week and know how to advertise
And then
to you.
suddenly you'll see that that's a suggested person you may know.
Yeah, exactly.
Have any of you found that? Like you go somewhere, you meet somebody, you don't exchange phone numbers, but it will pop up as somebody you may know.
Right.
It's kind of spooky.
You may say, I need a new umbrella, and you'll suddenly see these ads for umbrellas on Instagram, So, while this is happening, I think it's important to caution that most Indians don't know about this, even now. And that's where digital literacy is so important. It's one thing for the smartphone complex, the companies and the government to be very gung-ho about what this device can do. But it's very important for us to know as well that...
Sorry, that's what I want to take to Robin, that, we're calling this a revolution. But when revolutions become the new establishment, then it isn't a revolution anymore. And the new behemoths are all of these digital giants that are literally ruling the world today. So is it still a revolution then?
I think a revolution leads to a new regime, and we've perhaps got a new regime. Instead of General Motors, it's Facebook and Amazon and Google. They've replaced the old multinationals that I grew up with as the kind of global villains of the worst kind of global capitalism. But I think the interesting thing is that what you're describing is uniquely Indian, this unreadiness and lack of knowledge about the digital world isn't really. You would know that in Australia people are, I think, equally unconscious of what they're giving up or what we're giving up when we enter data in the phone. I think the only way one can approach the digital world is to know that as soon as you enter it, you no longer have a privacy of the kind you may once have thought you had. You're entering a world where virtually everything you do on the keyboard or with the camera is going to be known to somebody else and can be known by somebody else. Once you're there, you're giving something away. If you don't want to give something away, you're very ill-advised to be there.
So, and the other thing, Assa, is that I don't know how many people go through this experience, but like when you're installing an app, it'll say, do you want this to have access to your contacts, your SMS, your voice, etc. And you're in such a hurry that you're going yes, 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 without even understanding what that means. Like, I'm sure it's happened to all of you unconsciously, right? I'm seeing young people here nod. You're downloading something, you're uploading something, and you're in a hurry. What the phone has done is it's constantly made us people in a hurry. It's constantly made us people on the go. And in this hurry, we actually don't realize how much of our lives we're literally surrendering out into the ether somewhere.
And what's interesting in what you're saying is that the mobile phone introduced millions of people into these contractual relationships. And it's contractual relationships not only downloading apps, but it's also contractual relationships in buying these phones that have warranties and guarantees, and people are going to all these care centers. For example, when we were doing our field work, a lot of people that have never entered a kind of corporate environment where the queue is by numbers, and they face women who speak to them in Shuddha Hindi, and they discuss their mobile when it's broken, and that they pay up front. It's not like in the hole in the wall where you just sit next to the person and you say, please revive my mobile now, I need it in order to survive. So there's a whole slew of industry, ancillary industries that came with the mobile phone when it entered India. And that was very revealing when my mobile phone broke. And I had to have it for interviews, for photography, and my friends told me, well, first of all, just rub it against your jeans and put it under the fan. It might start working. But then it was too precious for me to take it just to the bazaar and to fix it. And that's where I was introduced to this whole new economy of mobile phone care that people are introduced to.
So there are lots of kind of spooky and not fully understood downsides, but let's look at the brighter side of the story, Ravi. Women. what has it done for women in your research? All three of you looked at that quite closely. I'll start with you. We heard this word autonomy, right? There is also the downside of MMS's videos being made of women being used to blackmail them, acute pressure on women to not own a phone, the fear of that autonomy. How did you in your research see the relationship between smartphones and women play out? And I'm talking obviously about rural women, but not necessarily only rural women.
Yeah, so as I began to write India Connected, one of the stats that really jumped out at me was that in 2014, about 70% of Indian internet users were men. Only 30% were women. And what's worse, if you go to Indian villages, 90% of internet users were men, only 10% were women. So, you know, 1 out of 10 village women in India were online, but 9 out of 10 had no access. And so, to begin with, the reason why the smartphone is so important for them is that, you know, it's a cheap way of getting online. It's a cheap way of having something that they've never had and was being denied to them. So, there are all these villages in India, and you've all heard the stories, where phones are banned for young girls because you know, and all kinds of outlandish things that the village sarpanches will say about this issue, ranging from, you know, women don't have the brains, or they don't have the aptitude, or they can't deal with the phone, and stuff like that. And really, if you think about it, the greatest obstacle to women getting online in India is men. And so much as though the phone is a tool for so much good, it is also, you know, I think it's something that men see and want to deny women the right to use.
And the digital divide along fault lines of gender is still quite acute. Elsewhere in the world, there are more women on Facebook, for example, than men. This is one of the few countries in the world where there are more men on Facebook than women. Yeah. And Robin, I'm just wondering how you made sense of that. One is the fear of autonomy, of independence. But there's also access. There are issues of access. There's issues of who controls the cash in the house.
You could also say it revealed the wisdom of Indian women to stay off blessed Facebook. That's a very good policy.
Are you saying you don't have a cell phone? I mean, you look like a wise person.
I smoke, but I don't inhale, if you know what I mean.
And you know what Bill Clinton got away with in the 90s, he wouldn't today, so that doesn't go down well.
I need to see other people's baby pictures. That's why I belong to Facebook. But I would never post on Facebook. Oh, dear, no.
You've never done a Facebook post?
I've never done a Facebook post, and I wouldn't. Why do people do it?
Why would you not?
Because nothing happens to me that's sufficiently interesting, and if I thought it did, then I would have other ways of trying to project myself. You
do know this makes you an oddity in this. I have a feeling you might be the only person in this entire Betak that has never posted. Anyone else?
Oh
my God!
Yeah, look at the wise people.
Anyone else here who's never done a Facebook post? Please raise your hand. Like never. Can you tell us why not? You're not on Facebook?
Congratulations.
And my God, a lot of hands, and I'd like to hear more on that, but complete your point. Sorry.
Well, that was my point. I think there's a great deal of wisdom in not. As I say, once you enter the digital world, in whatever capacity you do it, but certainly with Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, you're becoming a very public person, and that, unless you want to be public in that way, I'm told it's the only way to promote a book. And my colleague, I think, is very unhappy with me because I don't do it. But he does it. He tries to make up for both of us.
But I think that the interesting point that you raised, Ravi, about women, I mean, mobile phones, it exactly captures that kind of paradox of the mobile phone. It can be very subversive of power relations, whether it's caste hierarchies or gender, but it also reproduces it in many ways. So, for instance, I was talking to women, upper caste women, Brahmin women in Banaras, and she just went into her in-laws. She just got married. She came from the district of Unnao, and she said to me, I used to have a mobile phone before I got married, but once I got to my in-laws' house, I'm at the bottom of the hierarchy. I had to relinquish my mobile phone and leave it at my maternal household, right?
Yeah.
So that the mobile phone in many ways poses a threat because it demonstrates that you're actually human. You've got networks, you've got photographs, you've got a past. And that you're entering the new household, they wanted the tabula rasa. right? And the same thing happens with a maid whom I met, and she told me that her employee took her mobile phone and threw it on the wall and bashed it. And I was thinking, what is the reason that it's so threatening, the mobile phone? And I mean, maids themselves, they transact in gupshup and gossip inside the household, outside the household. They speak to other maids. They might reveal things that the employer doesn't want to spread the word about them. So I mean, of course, the reason she said is that the maid is too distracted. You don't want her to have a mobile phone.
So Ravi, I'll take that to you. This is the paradox, right? Early on in this conversation, you said the mobile phone to India is a bit like what the car was to the original American dream. But what do you do with a phenomenon that is both a symbol of disruption and anti-status quo, but also a new symbol of being co-opted by the new establishment, right? There is so much about the digital space that, as Robin said, is the new multinational, are the new behemoths. And it's simultaneously both of these things. It is this intrusive, eavesdropping, snooping sort of space, but it is also that space that can liberate you. It is also that place that can entrap you.
Yeah, and you know, it's so great that you framed the question that way with the analogy with the car. And the reason why I say it's great is that much in the same way that the car was always seen as a tool for freedom, I think the world very quickly realized that the car is also a weapon of mass destruction. And, you know, with road accidents and all the things that you could do with a car. And that's the reason why governments and companies have invested so much money on ad campaigns to not drink and drive, to wear seatbelts, for example. And I think we must see the phone in the same way. We must see it as a tool of immense empowerment, as a tool of efficiency and productivity and connecting people and all of those things. And we've both, all the three of us have all outlined those things in our books. But it is so much more than that. And it, in its own way, it is a weapon of mass destruction. It must be seen as that. And so with that comes a responsibility. I think, you know, major smartphone companies and cell phone companies, sort of the, you know, the Airtels and Vodafones of this world, I think they owe us as well to invest in ad campaigns and to invest in digital literacy in a way that hasn't really been done globally. And I mean, we were speaking earlier about wisdom. I think the wisdom we now have about what phones can do and what we're giving up and where our data is going.
It's still very minuscule.
It's a very new wisdom.
Yeah.
We're still figuring out what's happened. And so I think we need a lot of global soul searching and education.
Yeah, what I think is so impactful, or makes such an impact on me, is the fact that the technology that gives us the phone, of course, does so many other things. We talk about digitization. All we really mean is a great series of zeros and ones transmitted by pulses of electricity. Now, those symbols can be used to do a whole lot of other things as well. What I'm thinking of in political terms, we referred to the 2007 UP election, where the 2G phone was put into the hands of the old Kanchiram Bamsef cadre of political workers and proved in that election to be a very powerful force in mobilizing people. 4 years later, 5 years later, Akhilesh Yadav was pictured on a bicycle like the old Bamsef workers with a mobile phone in one ear. The 2007 people had first mover advantage. Jump to the 2014 election, the digital technology was used for the holograms. Barkha, you would know much more about that than we do. But the notion that there were hundreds of vans projecting the Prime Minister into small towns all across North India on particular nights.
Yeah. I mean, 2014 in some ways was a narrative that was pushed and created on digital and pushed using that as well. And that brings me to my next question. How has it changed politics? What has research shown you? I did give the example of WhatsApp. The fact that actually political campaigns now seem to have become a competitive set of fake news claims, right? That is actually what's happening. It's almost like you have to train yourself to not believe anything you receive as a forward. And, you know, Facebook tried to, responding to the criticism, try to add a thing that says forward, i.e. don't necessarily believe this. But I'm not sure that you repeat something 1,000 times and it circulates, that people are still looking at that little forward and saying, oh, maybe it's not true.
Yeah. And, this reminds me of, you remember, for those of you who've used the internet for 15, 20 years, do you remember chain mails in the late 1990s when you first got a Hotmail address and, someone would send you an email and say, if you don't forward this to 10 people, you'll be unlucky in love. And you're like, whoops, click forward, send it to 10 people. And then, we learned from trial and error. We learned from trial and error that you don't forward everything that you get, that you exercise discretion, that you look at things with some basic skepticism. But we learned through trial and error. India's learning through trial and error with hundreds of millions of people making mistakes. And I think that's what we're seeing with WhatsApp. That's what we're seeing with the viral forwards, with fake news being forwarded around. And I think the lesson to take away from this, on the one hand, companies can do more. So, WhatsApp, of course, has its plans to sort of limit the number of forwards and try and monitor what's going on there. But more broadly, I think all of us need to realize as well that, this is a country where media literacy is really important, where digital literacy is really important. And this isn't uniquely an Indian problem. Look at the United States in the 2016 election. To speak of politics, fake news can spread very quickly. And it's something that, the skepticism muscle is something we all need to build very quickly. And I think we are building it through trial and error. It's just that the errors will be big.
On the issue of how it's disrupted Indian politics.
Well, I think that what we're seeing today, like you said, you can't forward it to more than 5 people, and it's not specific to India. I can see it in other elections where this is going to happen.
Give us some
So,
examples.
for example, in Israel, now we are facing an election with Netanyahu, who is very media savvy, much like Modi himself, and has been in power and is using the media. He's got several Facebook pages. He's got WhatsApp teams. A recent article came out about he's been investing millions of shekels just for his media campaigns in order to spread different forms of news. One of which was, for example, before in the last election, he spread news on his Facebook page that the Palestinians are coming in droves to vote in the elections. So let's gather and vote. He wanted to bring his own people. So it's not necessarily unique to India. India, of course, the question is of scale. And we've seen also the very insidious side of these kind of forwarding mechanisms.
But all three of you clearly found things that were unique to India, right? Which is why Cellphone Nation, India Connected. What sets India apart culturally, politically, socially, in the way that Indians interface with their smartphones from other spaces that you may have researched or been exposed to, Ravi?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I think the Indian experience, it is unique. There are similarities with, say, many African countries, with some developing countries, other South Asian countries. But, the reason why I saw India as a unique case is that there is no other place that has, this kind of scale to begin with. Hundreds of millions of people discovering the internet in a short space of time. There's no other place that has so many people who are as poor as India does. There's no other country in the world that has 273 million illiterate people as of 2011. There's no other place in the world that has divides along the lines of caste and gender and all kinds of hierarchies that we've created in India, which is not to say other societies aren't unequal. It's just that India, to me, felt like this sort of petri dish of all of these changes and it seemed so ripe for disruption in a way that other countries were just further along the development curve. China's another great comparison, but the difference between China and India is that, the Chinese were getting rich before they got online. So they tended to have PCs, and so their experience was quite different. Their internet is also different in that it is quite homogenous. It's one language, it's controlled by the state. The Indian internet is more anarchic. It's sort of, on the one hand, got so many Western players from Google and Facebook and WhatsApp, but so many emerging Indian players in Indian languages. Look at it this way. In the 90s or early 2000s, if you were to draw a Venn diagram of internet users and English speakers, there was almost complete overlap between the two circles. What's changed with smartphones is that you can have multilingual phones through software. And of course, I began my book with a story of these women who were illiterate and they were speaking to their phones. And so, you know, imagine, put yourself in the shoes of a person who's illiterate in India. There's no way you can dream of ever using technology or computers, and then to be able to take a phone and speak to it and say, Mujhe Taj Mahal dikhao, and it shows you a video of the Taj Mahal. That's powerful. That's uniquely Indian. And I think that's what makes this story, which we're all of us are living through, such a revolution.
Yeah, I agree with what Ravi is saying, that given the multilingual nature of India, China, in the scriptural sense, is not multilingual as India is. The fact that we in India work in 11 different scripts, there are probably people in this room who can do all 11 of them, but that makes the phone even more powerful here and more useful, because it does bring a kind of unity that otherwise wouldn't be there. Similarly, with a population that's still, what, 1/4 illiterate, the phone offers so many more opportunities. So it seems to me it's an even more powerful tool in this country than elsewhere.
What we haven't actually spoken about, we spoke about privacy in the context of, the big giants, Amazon, Google, Facebook. But there is a domestic privacy debate, and that is Aadhaar, right? And it's been a big debate because on the one hand, it gives everybody an identity. You can get up and say, I exist, this is my Aadhaar number, this is my ID card, these are my biometrics. On the other hand, I think, was it you who said that this is quite an elite debate? Would you say that the Aadhaar debate is also a very elite debate? It's a contentious question, but it needs to be asked because it's one of the most politically volatile questions in the country today.
Yeah, the Aadhaar debate has always struck me as very strange in India. It's completely polarized. On the one hand, you have critics of Aadhaar who point out the flaws in the system and how there are leakages and how our data isn't safe. And on the other hand, you have the government which touts it as this really important thing that allows 1.2 billion Indians to say, I am me, and have proof for that, which they may not have had before. And the two sides just don't meet halfway in that, there are leakages, and so the government needs to admit and own up to them and build trust that, yes, there are problems in the system and we're going to fix it. And at the same time, I think critics need to see that there actually is immense value to Aadhaar as a system to identify 1.2, 1.3 billion people, but also then look at the bright side with what Aadhaar has. It has your biometrics, it has your name, your address, your number, but think about what it doesn't have. What you're giving Facebook, what you're giving Google is your browsing history. You're giving them your contacts. You're giving them your deepest, darkest secrets without knowing that you are.
But the counter to that is you're choosing to, in some maybe ill-informed way, but you're choosing to, and the other is
in a fine print sense.
Is a state, in a fine print sense, but the other is a state diktat.
Exactly, and so it's a great debate to have. I do think it's mostly a debate that we would have in Jaipur or in a Delhi studio. And I don't think Indians at large are having this debate at, addas and chai shops around the country. They should. I think we need to be talking about data openly. I think it's an excellent debate to have. Again, I just feel like it's a very polarized debate. There is good and bad.
Assa, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think like Ravi was saying earlier, it's a very elite debate. At least with the people that I work with in northern India, for them it's a non-issue. The question of Aadhaar. For them, it's a non-issue going onto Facebook and taking pictures and tagging people, and the idea of privacy. Look, they live in small rooms with 5, 6, 7 people. Some of them don't sleep in the same room. They go and sleep in the temple. The mobile does constitute privacy. It has passwords. They never had passwords before, right? They can watch pornography on their mobile phones. Again, this was something that you used to get in train stations and cellophane paper that people used to hide. now they can share it together, these men. So it does constitute a space of privacy, and they don't mind volunteering their data and their labor to Facebook or Google or WhatsApp. This is not an issue that they're concerned with.
In Australia at the moment, there's a government-sponsored mobile phone program for My Health, in which you can have all your medical records centralized so that if you're in a car accident in another state, they know your blood type at once, and so on. And that provokes just the sort of debate we're having here. There are people who say it's a great tool, what harm can it do? And there are others who are arguing this is a terrible thing because it means the material you're giving will almost certainly be misused in some instances. And I think that's true of Adar as well. What's the balance of probabilities, and what are the dangers to me if I've had a sexually transmitted disease at some earlier time? Can that be used if it's access to blackmail me? Those are the sorts of questions that are being thrown up in Australia, but not very different from what we're talking about here.
Okay, let's open this up for questions and comments, and you can even talk about your experience on how you found a smartphone changed your life. I'll start here. Can we get a mic into the audience? Can you please stand?
Barkha, I do have a question that we from the sponsors.
Okay.
From their contest winner from Patrika Game Changer series. When people are still having doubts about the use of mobiles and are worried about their ill effects, how do you think that the mobile can be used to strengthen the nation?
Okay. Who wants to take that? Anyone?
I think an Indian national should take that.
Especially today.
Yes, especially today, yes.
Gosh, how do we think the phone can be used to strengthen the nation? That's a tough question. And I say that because, one shouldn't put the mantle of strengthening or fixing on the phone. And I think if you do that, you set it up for failure. And this is, again, something that we covered in both of our books, but the phone, if you look at the initial 2G cell phone era and now the smartphone 4G era, they've come in a wave of hope, in a wave of optimism. I remember when Modi was campaigning, one of the things he famously said in 2014 is, I'll ensure that there's a smartphone in every hand. That was a hopeful message. Everyone wants one of these things. They invest so much hope and their dreams in smartphones. And that comes with danger. It also comes with a setup for failure. And so I wouldn't say the phone is something that will necessarily strengthen the nation, and I don't think we should see it as such.
Okay, we'll go into the audience now. Could you please stand here? Yes, in the jacket. Can we get a mic, please? Sir, or to your side, there's a mic there. Yes.
Thank you. Fascinating conversation. A couple of thought triggers, GDPR, and also
Yes.
in relation to the context of personal data. I think that we need to talk about personal data wallets. Equally, I think that the this aspect of digital education is critical, certainly within the young amongst us. My question is, conversely, if you are taking data and you're restricting data, how are the companies going to support the development and the innovation and these platforms that allow us to communicate if we don't allow certain aspects of our data to be used? And in which context, how do we control it? Thank you.
I think that's a great question, and GDPR also, like the way Europe has actually framed or created protective barriers around data. Can we ever have that in a porous, intrinsically porous culture like India? One, and I think there's a merit in that question. That do we have to agree to give up some of our data for this, technology to have greater capacity? Anyone who wants to take that, Robin?
I'm thinking in terms of advertising, which is so much a revenue earner for these great corporate digital companies, if they were only able to do what the old newspaper classified advertising department was, which was to take your advertisement and have an address to send you the bill, that would be fine. But of course, they can take so much more. If we could confine their take to simply the advertising that they would give to particular products for appearing on particular sites, that would be fine. But they have so much more capacity to take more data and to use it in ways that you wouldn't anticipate. I don't think my view that they should behave like old newspaper classified advertising departments is ever likely to prevail, but that's the model that I think many of us have in our minds.
Okay, the young lady here. Yeah.
I wanted to ask, in an age of where our phone can listen to us, what do you think is the role of organizations such as Cambridge Analytica, which actually like assemble all the data available on different social media sites and so on?
I think Barkha put it really well. It both liberates us and it entraps us. And it entraps us because we do volunteer our time and our labor and we're commodified.
Yeah.
And this is, it holds the same with the political views that
Why
we
do we
have.
do it? I think we didn't examine our own collective psychology, maybe. If I could push you on that,
Well,
why do we do it? Is
arg-
it that we don't understand what we're doing?
Arguably, it's because we're social animals. That's one thing. We want to interact with people. But on the other hand, we're more atomized as a result of social media. And so we actually publicly want to voice our opinions. They say that Twitter is for the grumpy ones, and Facebook is for the show
I thought
posts.
Twitter was for the old and wise, and Instagram was for the millennials.
And
Did you just say old and
and-
wise, Twitter?
Old and wise. Actually, there's nothing wise about it. Old and argumentative.
and we want to communicate globally as well, and I think that's important.
So there's another paradox here. I'll take another question to explore. This technology, this obsession with our phones, it's connecting us but making us lonelier in actual physical spaces. You're constantly displaced and disconnected. You do not know how to have a human conversation anymore. You have all those jokes about people sitting in cafeterias and like actually just looking at their phones. People can't go out to dinner without checking their phones. So what is it doing to us in terms of our social habits? Yes, question here.
Good afternoon. Myself, Kushag. Basically, my question is for whole the panel. Because of the illiteracy in India, so is it important that why should we not educate all those peoples who are not literate, not in the terms of digital education, in the terms of general education? And my second question is, as you know that Supreme Court has banned the pornography on mobiles, but still it is available on there. So how it will be possible for the general people to use it in a right way?
No,
I mean, I'm talking about the cell phones.
what was the first part of your question?
My question
I don't
is-
think they can answer the second part. What's the first part?
My question is that in an illiterate country like
You're
India,
saying why not focus on general literacy and why mobile literacy?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, can this substitute, like Ravi had that thing of, people who can't read and write talking to their phones. Can one substitute the other?
Eventually, I think it does lead to an improvement in literacy. If you remember the newspaper revolution of 20 or 30 years ago, we thought television was going to destroy newspapers in India. In fact, it didn't. Television led people to want to read newspapers because television was so fleeting. So I think the use of the phone is going to enable more and more people to become literate. I think to become much more, as well as the fact that, as Ravi will tell you, the 4G phone means you can get by with a minimal literacy, but the more you have, the more you get. The more you can manipulate your machine, the more satisfaction it's going to bring back to you in the form of pictures and exchanges with other people.
Yeah, go
And
ahead.
literacy is
Sorry.
aspirational in India. We shouldn't forget that. Everyone wants to be literate. Everyone wants to learn English. There's a reason why Hello English is one of the most popular apps in India, because people want to learn. So that won't go away.
Yes.
Yeah, hi. I had a question that in the good old days, it was considered that a hat was a symbol of respect, but shoes was a symbol of power. And in now times, phones play a very important role in that. Like if somebody has an Apple phone, but not an MI or a Samsung, he's considered a rich person or something like that. And the second part is that through our mobile phones or internet, there are a lot of ways of terrorism. Like we see there are mobile bombers or suicide bombers who do it through the ways of their mobile phones. But on the other aspect of this, we see that there is e-learning, there is e-commerce. So what would be the side effects and everything?
Yeah. So the class hierarchies that technology has created, the sort of Apple cool vis-a-vis the mass phone, and also the phone is an instrument of terror, not just actually in triggering devices, but encrypted spaces that nobody can, decode. There are journalists who spend their lives trying to decode encrypted spaces of ISIS and getting enlisted in those spaces so they can report on them. Assa?
I think that what's interesting, the mobile phone is the largest consumer item in India, but I don't think it holds that kind of status as it did in the past. Now everybody has it. It's so cheap, it's so available. And even before in India, I think those who couldn't afford to change their mobile phones with the fashion obsolescence and planned obsolescence every year and a half like we do in the so-called West, people continue to use their mobile. I was expecting people to always upgrade here. Right? And no, when I go into places working in UP, people are not so concerned with what kind of mobile do I have. It's the functionality of it. And it's very much useful for enhancing your social milieu, but also for occupational reasons. The Boatmen in Banaras, for them, they're communicating with tourists and pilgrims from all over India, but not because they're semi-literate. They do it by voice. Right? They do WhatsApp by voice, and they receive it by voice. So literacy, we need to think about a difference, not in a narrow way. Literacy is expanding as a result, and we should conceive it as such.
Okay, here. Just stand so we can get you the mic. Yeah.
Hi, very interesting conversation. I actually work in the mobile for development space. So I just wanted to add, I see every day people's lives being enhanced by the mobile phones. So yes, it is having a major impact. We see it with farmers getting access to weather and agriculture information. We're seeing drop rates in mother and child mortality rates because people can now use IVR to get information about health and sanitation. We're seeing mobile identity coming forward because it makes people count those who do not have identity cards. So I just want to say that, working in the mobile for development space, there is a lot happening to strengthen a nation and other countries as well, and I'm proud to be in that line of work.
Sure, and good for you. Yes, here, if you could just stand, it's easier to then identify. Yes.
Yeah, hi. My question was regarding basically the right to property when it comes to...
Right to property?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do we reconcile our right to property and the fact that most mobile phones or even many electronic appliances nowadays, I won't restrict it to just mobile phones, that have software built in, we kind of sign a license agreement, software license agreement before we buy a phone. Like we buy a phone and then we're essentially signing that agreement. We have no right over the software, and in cases such as, I won't again restrict it to only mobile phones, even tractors for that matter.
So basically, let me understand your question. It's about ownership, right?
Yeah.
And what
rights do we have?
And this is an interesting question because I'll just add a converse side. That the whole thing about the internet was meant to be that it was free. Like that was supposed to be the counter-revolution that, hey, this is our answer to capitalism. And now it's created all sorts of copyright, ownership, who owns the content. And you can go on screaming, and YouTube's now developed some software where they'll pull down something or they'll send you an email if you're violating copyright. But it's a really interesting question on ownership.
It's a fascinating question, and try and frame it this way. So let's say you have a large book collection, like physical books, and when you die, you can bequeath it to your children, physically, right? You can say these books are yours. But if you have a large Kindle collection, a digital book collection, or an iTunes music collection, it's actually linked to your account and your password, and you will lose, your children are not going to inherit your iTunes collection, for example, or at least there's no way of doing that I know of. And so the whole sort of notion of what we own in a digital sense, there's a reason why the World Wide Web is, the wild, wild web. There's a whole sense of, a whole realm of rulemaking and laws and copyright things that we haven't still fully figured out in terms of, someone mentioned GDPR earlier. We're only just beginning to regulate this space, and there's a lot more to go there.
I would just add that the mobile phones are the archives of our life, right? And there's a reason why when I talk to people, they never throw their mobile phones. They keep it in the drawer. Yeah. They're jealous of their privacy. They want things to remain. They keep it in a safe or in somewhere else, but it's something that's so personal to us. When people walk out of the house without their mobile, they tell me, I feel naked, right? So it's a prosthesis. It's an extension of the self.
Yeah. Okay, I'm being told I have time for just one more question, so last question here. Yes.
Yeah, I'm online, therefore I exist. Therefore, I feel
I'm
that
online, therefore I exist.
Yes. Yes, I come from a
That's,
remote
that's a
village.
new take on I think, therefore I am,
Sure.
right? Yeah.
I come from a remote village of one corner of Meghalaya, and I could be here only because of this mobile. All your lectures are available on YouTube. Still, I came here, and all these people came here to listen to you. Therefore, I would like to actually differ from the opinion that it is creating a sort of alienation and all that. Because being here, I'm connecting with many other people also. But I'm worried about the competition in the market, about the internet providers. Reliance Jio is almost taking over many other providers. So what is going to happen? Is it
Why are
going to
you
be-
worried about it? As a consumer, it's good for you if they're all competing and you're getting good rates.
I guess it is not a healthy competition, like one is taking over the others.
Okay.
Is it going to be more expensive later, which may not be affordable for me?
Okay. Okay. Thank you for your question. Last comments. You can incorporate what you heard there. A positive story, but like.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely to end on a positive note. I think we have all soured on phones. We have all soured on technology, and some of that is a good thing. But there's a danger to going too far in that direction. We mustn't forget stories like yours. If you wouldn't have been here were it not for YouTube and the phone, that's a wonderful thing. We must celebrate that. I think phones are connecting us. The internet is making life easier in millions of ways. And in ways that we can't calculate. GDP calculations, for example, don't take into account the efficiencies in our lives from using Google Maps or from not having to wait 3 hours in a queue to pay an electricity bill. Those are things that are intangible in a sense. And so I think it's a good way to think about this in the end, in that there is more good than bad. It should be more hopeful than, more hope than despair. And as long as we see it as, again, like the car, like TVs, like other great inventions, something that is still quite nascent and something that we need to work together on to regulate and better.
Assa, last thoughts?
I think that technology is never neutral. It's how we use that technology. And if we're more informed, we can celebrate the mobile phone, like was just mentioned in the development sector or in other areas. So the mobile phone is an instrument, but it doesn't define us.
Robin, are you convinced to come onto Facebook?
Oh, very much so. Oh, no, not on the Facebook. No, not Facebook. But I wouldn't give away my old 2G phone. I think the one thing that worries me is the fragility of this technology, that we know that you can close it down completely if you're a government, or you can control it in various ways. It's in security situations, it can get closed down. A few explosions, the odd meteorite, and the whole digital world disappears, because there are choke points where the technology comes together that brings us our individual messages. So I would hate that to happen, because I think on the whole it is potentially a hugely democratic device, but what kind of democracy is left to the people who are using the phones?
Well, it's a fascinating phase of churn and change, and in churn and change there's always both good and bad. I don't think anyone's giving up their smartphones anytime soon, despite all our concerns, and let's hope it becomes an instrument for equality and for democratization of information and access. Thank you for a great panel. Do pick up their books. They're fantastic, very interesting reads. And thank you for being a great audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists for that fascinating discussion. That was great. We could have gone on for another hour, I think. And thank you to our big thanks to our sponsor, Patrika Game Changer Series, for sponsoring the session. Please, everybody, please take any rubbish that you brought in with you, any food items, anything that you brought in with you, please take it with you. We've been experiencing an increasingly rubbish-filled venue for the last couple of days, so please don't leave anything behind.